Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. And thank you especially to the people who make this possible for you with their support at patreon.com/SW7x7. So yeah, it seems like it's maybe a little early in a way to do a rewatch, like, you usually do a rewatch ahead of a new season being released and whatnot. But this series, The Acolyte, was so dense, the season was so dense in terms of the information that it gave us and the emotional beats that we got to experience, that I thought it might be interesting to look at some particular aspects of the episodes that we'd seen in light of the entirety of the season. For a start, I'll flag the fact that it's really fascinating that the Jedi allowed Saul in the current time period to be teaching younglings, that was his job, especially considering the level of attachment he formed with Osha and May and how difficult a prospect that was for him. I mean, still holding on to Hollows and Jackie calling him out on that. He has an excuse, but of course he would have an excuse, right? And also Vanessa Rowe underestimating the level of attachment that he's still feeling about Osha. It seems like it's not really a good idea to be putting Saul in a position to be mentoring younglings, because he might end up having that kind of attachment again. And though he does say that he's made peace with what happened on Brendok, it's interesting that the conversation that Kymir has with May about Torben seemingly at peace in his meditation and whatnot, that peace is a lie, right? They have that Sith conversation, but I know we heard it applied to Torben. I don't think we necessarily thought about it being applied to Saul. He says he's made peace with it, but clearly he hasn't. And it's interesting that we have a bit of reversal in the sense that Kymir tells May that May can give Torben something that only she can give him, which is absolution, whereas at the end of the series, it's flipped around in the sense that it's Saul who gives Osha absolution for her killing him. Also, on the rewatch, one of the things that jumps out right away is when Yord and his Padawan show up and question Osha. Osha tells Yord, "You really think I'm capable of betraying the Order, overpowering a Jedi Master, and murdering her, right?" And this is ultimately exactly what happens at the end of the season. But the seeds of Osha's turn to the dark side were planted throughout the season, and we see it in these first two episodes, right? We hear about the fact that she wasn't able to let go of her attachment, of her grief, her mourning, and apparently the Jedi are just not good at helping people deal with this stuff. And then becoming aware that May is alive, she is interested in revenge, which is what, Saul says, no, you're supposed to be looking for justice, not revenge. And she's still angry about May and the fact that May killed her entire family, or at least that's what she believes. So she's already carrying around all this anger, and this anger is just going to get transferred over, but the fact that it's still there is already a red flag for us. Despite all that, we find out that she was a devoted Padawan. She seemingly was trying to do her best, but it also seems that her inability to detach from emotions may have also led her to think of Master Saul not just as a mentor, but also as a father figure. And as we see them interacting, it doesn't seem like that was just a one-way thing. It seems like Master Saul kind of had that fatherly attachment as well. There's that moment on the ship where Master Saul sees the tattoo that Osha has, and she's like, yeah, and do you hate it, right? That's definitely a very father-daughter-like interaction, not a Master Padawan-like interaction. Then on the political front, we can talk about Vanessa Rowe talking to Saul about the situation, and if word got out that a former Jedi was killing one of their own, that would be a really bad thing. The political enemy is using it against us. That is exactly what happens by the end of this, because word gets out and it's a former Jedi who is accused of killing some of their own, since Master Saul is the person who is set up for the fall in this one. But Vernestra does say that their discretion is important, that their justice has to be swift and an example made, and she follows through on that. And not only does she do it to cover up what was really happening, but she also does it to cover up the fact that she knows that her former Padawan is alive and apparently suspected him to be dead. A couple other last things to note. I know we talked in previous episodes about how the kill a Jedi without a weapon was a little confusing. Does that mean that you're killing a Jedi who's not carrying a weapon, or does that mean you're killing a Jedi and you yourself don't have a weapon? Well, it was actually clear, and I just forgot. And I think some other people have forgotten as well, because I've seen this discussion happening online too. But in the beginning of the season, at the end of episode 1, when the stranger, aka Chimere, is monologuing to May, he talks about how, using a weapon against a Jedi is useless, and so you have to kill a Jedi without you yourself using a weapon. So there was clarity on that. And so that's why then when May uses poison to kill Torben, it doesn't count, because she goes into Chimere and says, I need a weapon, I need you to make me poison. And Chimere is like, yeah, well, that's going to be 2 that you've killed with a weapon, so your, odds are running down right now. And speaking of Chimere, there's a couple of interesting things to flag about him that carry throughout the series. First of all, in episode 2, when we first meet him and he tells the Jedi when he's cornered, like, don't do that mind wipe thing that you guys do, which of course is funny because that's ultimately what he ends up doing himself to May at the end of the season. And we already see him as a master of deflection. When the Jedi are questioning him, they're like, who is he and does May have a master? He's like, look, all I know is she's crazy and she's trying to kill 4 Jedi. And he gives them information that they would be interested in, but also does not answer the question that's presented to him. I think the only question that remains for me out of rewatching the first 2 episodes is, who do May and Chimere refer to when they refer to the Master when they're having their conversations in episode 2? And last but not least, considering that we saw the reveal of Darth Plagueis at the end of the season, when May and Chimere are talking about the Master, I don't know that they're necessarily talking about the same person. May seems to be talking about the stranger as the Master, just based on how she reacts in episodes 4 and 5 when she realizes that Chimere is on Kofar, right? Or the Master, who then reveals himself to be Chimere, is on Kofar. But when Chimere talks about the Master being pleased at the possibility of May killing Torben without a weapon, which then Osha, undercover, quote unquote, says, nah, he's the poison, right? Or when May is talking to Chimere about getting the poison made and says, yeah, it wouldn't go over well if you told the Master about this, we should keep it hush hush. It's not necessarily clear that Chimere is referring to himself as the Master, and I kind of think he wouldn't be. I mean, he would know that he is looking for a pupil, but he would be a master to that pupil, but he is not the Master. That would be Darth Plagueis. So I have a feeling that Chimere, when he says, oh, the Master will be pleased, he's not talking about himself in his secret identity. So those are some things I wanted to flag for consideration as a result of watching episodes 1 and 2 again, in light of having seen the whole season just recently and having it kind of fresh in my mind. And that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. I'd love to know what you think about anything that I'm throwing in on here, and add to it, please. If you're catching this on YouTube, comments are right there. On Spotify, Q&A section is there, and anywhere else, head over to the blog post for the show's episode at sw7x7.com and let me know what you think. And that's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. If you enjoy the show, please help me get it out to more people who might be interested in this dose of Star Wars joy. You can do that by just telling people. You can tell the algorithms with likes and comments and ratings and reviews and subscribes and joins and follows. And you can even help me as an independent producer create this daily dose of Star Wars joy. And you can learn more about that at patreon.com/SW7x7. And it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast, and may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.